You are listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. This episode is a highlight clip from this week's full episode. To listen in on the complete conversation, see the show notes for the link to the complete show. You can help us out by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate every bit of your support. I'm Morgan McKittrick, your producer, and this is Decidedly.
So what is a trauma bond? Explain how that forms.
Okay, so it's
what hold it has on somebody.
Okay, so it's kind of like Stockholm Syndrome, if you know what that is, where, somebody can be kidnapped and then they spend enough time with that person and they depend on that person, rely on that person, and by the end they're protecting that person. So a trauma bond's kind of similar in the fact that we get into this relationship and, it seems great at first, and then it starts that cycle. So it's good, and then it's, bad, and all the fighting happens, and it's abusive and those kind of things. And then what happens, and this is the key to the trauma bond, is when it comes around that other side of the cycle, it's almost like a carrot is being dangled in front of you of hope, that it's going to get better, because it does start to feel better. And in fact, people will describe that, when things are really bad within the relationship, as soon as that partner reaches out and is kind or nice to them, they almost feel this like relief. It's almost like their drug. But that little carrot that gets hung out there of hope that it's going to be better, and then it doesn't get better. And then it goes back around into that cycle again. And it just, every time it goes around, you just get bonded to that person even tighter. And so when you go to leave, that's when that withdrawal kind of happens, is that it makes it really hard for people to get out. So when people say, if it's so bad, why didn't you get out sooner? That's why. That's typically why, is that it's just,
are you saying that if somebody's in a toxic relationship and there are these momentary flashes of hope, in other words, this person is acting in a toxic way, but, they brought me flowers. They're nice. They're a nice person. They did this, nice thing for me. That it's that hope that creates, in essence, sort of a dopamine hit that that person is wanting to then experience this again. Is that how you're?
So the hope that that person's going to change. They hope that their partner's going to change because they see the good, and so so that's what they're basically just living on this idea of, see, he or she can be nice to me. They're good. I see the good side of them. And then they stay that way for a little while. And then it goes back into the abusive side of the cycle. And it just kind of does this over and over and over until somebody is ready to get out of that. And when they go to exit that relationship or think about, I need to be done with this, then it really becomes a problem, because they're literally addicted to that person, and they have to go through that whole experience of getting away from them.
So I can see that also, as you were talking about, Sanger, in a employer-employee relationship as well, why people stay in. I had a client who stayed in just a miserable job that she hated for years, getting underpaid, and she just wouldn't leave. I mean, she kept thinking it was going to get better. She was going to get a raise. They were going to open a new store. They were going to hire help for her. And it just never happened, in spite of my urging.
Yeah, the same kind of defenses get brought up, right? Well, but, they're working on this. And it's easier to see from the outside a lot of the time. Hey, you're getting underpaid.
Right,
you told me last week about how they yelled at you because you made a simple mistake.
Right, you're overworked.
Making you work, they're giving you overtime without any extra pay. There's no retirement benefits. What the heck are you?
What are you doing here?
It sounds crazy, but it can happen to anyone when they get caught up in that cycle, because it doesn't ever start that way.
Absolutely, and from personal experience, I worked at the same place I met my business partner at. It was really great when I started there, and then it just had some toxic things, toxic people, toxic behaviors of people there. And all of a sudden I started to feel like, wow, this almost feels like what my past relationship felt like. It felt very, very chaotic. But for some reason, it also felt good to be there. It felt familiar, right? It just felt like, oh, and so I stayed there a lot longer than I should have stayed there, just because, there was promises made, and I thought I was going to, move up, and, it didn't happen. So yeah, it can be exactly the same.
Thanks for making the great decision to listen in to this week's episode highlight. If you want more of what you just heard, see the show notes for the full episode. As always, for the latest decision-making tips, find us on decidedlypodcast.com or on Instagram @decidedlypodcast. And be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter from the link in the show notes. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review as well. We read all of your comments, so if you learned some decision-making tips today, let us know. Until next time, this is Decidedly. Insights, advice, and comments provided by Sean Smith, Sanger Smith, and speakers identified as part of the Decidedly podcast should not be considered recommendations. Speakers not identified as members of Decidedly are expressing their opinion, and their statements should not be construed as reflecting the views of the Decidedly team. This podcast is produced solely for informational purposes, not personalized advice.